So you're Bruce, right? So we're going to say hello to everybody in England and further afield. And this is Bruce, who runs Bruce McKittrick Books, and you are from where?
Just outside Philadelphia,
cool.
In the United States.
Okay. Right, so I'm now going to, well, Bruce is going to show us an incunabula. It's a book dated from 1486, one of the earliest printed books, and it's called Petrus Lombardus, and I'm going to leave it to you now, Bruce, to describe this book in detail.
Take this guy out.
Right, so we're just going over here, and I'm going to switch the camera around.
Is that people didn't think of them as transient.
Yeah.
And the book would be made were often hundreds of years old.
Yeah.
And the books that they made would be made to last hundreds of years.
Yeah.
So just in the exterior, we see that there's metal protecting the parts of the book that might be damaged by being dropped. So this is a piece of metal that's bent around the edge. This is a
wooden board.
That's a wooden board.
Yeah.
So a piece of brass, and then tacked in with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 nails, and then on the back, the clasps to hold the book in place because paper expands and contracts.
Exactly, yeah.
As it gets humid or drier, and generally in Northern Europe, where this was living, things were more humid than less humid.
Yeah.
So their fluctuation of humidity was much less dramatic. But they understood that a stable object should be held tightly closed. So a serious piece of metalwork, the brass clasp, and if you look, that's actually 2 pieces of pigskin put together from different directions.
Yeah.
And again,
so
more brass nails.
Yeah,
oh, absolutely.
Really
more
strong,
brass nails holding it. And the clasp with it, it's called, the little decoration here is called chasing. So it could be quite simple, but here you see they just added a little decoration. They had snips and they cut the edges out to make it look nice. And here they're nailing this into a wooden board. And all of this is just for stability.
And when you think this book is completely original, it doesn't look like it's been repaired.
No, it's a contemporary binding. Yeah. And I think we may have identified the location of the binder. Well, we identified the workshop. There's a very large database of tools, and they associate tools together. So here's that's a fairly distinctive tool, that little bird.
Right.
I wouldn't want to have to go looking too much for those foliage sprays.
Yeah.
Or this little guy, you see, that's one tool with the little flower petals. That's sawtooth tool is another. So they're probably on this cover.
Yeah.
7 or 8 different tools.
Yeah. 11
different tools, but in probably 75 to 100 individual impressions. And these lines were made with rolls rather than individual stamps.
Yeah, we do it with brass rolls. So it's probably
and that's how. So the book was put into these pieces of wood with laced in with probably pieces of pigskin we can't see.
Yeah, it would have been.
And they cut a hole in the wood and would lace it through. And then they take a wooden peg that's cut to the right thickness and drive it in to hold the pigskin in place as it was laced through the wooden board. These are really permanent. It's a way of thinking about a reading material that's quite uncommon today. We don't construct washing machines or automobiles to last 50 years.
I know.
And these were made to last hundreds of years. So this book was
in pristine condition.
One reason what we like to do is, and here was a section.
And the paper looks like it was done yesterday.
Pink
tab,
pigskin, so that the reader could easily see where the divisions were when they said, "Oh, I'm going to start with this part here." Here's the beginning of my
Hello, Lucy.
The beginning of my text.
Yeah.
So I finish. Here's the beginning of my index, giving me all my subjects. Here's the end of the last text.
Wow.
And the book is printed. The black part is printed from individual pieces of type, as we probably, if you're old enough and you had shop class and you learned to print, individual pieces of type set line by line, After the book was printed, another person came with a pot of red ink, so-called a rubricator.
Yeah.
This is where our word red comes from, and made these highlights so that your eye was guided, say, down the page. Here's the beginning of a paragraph,
right.
larger type, but accented. And every majuscule, every uppercase letter was stroked in red. So initials were supplied in red and blue, I think, in this book.
We're just talking about a book from 1476.
Here's another one. So he's working in two different colors. Here's an initial in blue. In fact, often I think they alternate here.
Yeah.
In red and blue. Here's red and red. So it's not alternating in red and blue, but sometimes they're in green or in yellow. This is the edge of the sheet. If you can see, that's a little uneven. That's the edge of the sheet. That means the top here wasn't trimmed. And I'll here's the sewing guards from the front. You see how it's manuscript waste.
Yes, old.
So that was cut, and it's
predating the book binding, which is 1476, isn't it?
Well, probably the binding's within about 10 years of the printing date.
Yeah.
Let's see if I can get in there. Here we go. Between the two pieces, and you can see the sewing.
Yeah.
Can you?
Yes, I can see that.
Can you see the? Can you?
Yeah, I can
my
see
fingers are a little pudgy for that.
Yeah,
but
yeah, I can see it. Though.
My pencil, I want you to know, is the lead is not extended. It's a piece of plastic, essentially. So I'm not marking the book.
Yes.
And I'll just find some other uncut edges there. Portions of the book which are quite dramatically.
So this is one of the earliest printed books, and printing started Gutenberg Press, didn't it, in the 1450s. So this is one of the earliest printed books.
Here's an example
a few from
of
1476.
where the edge of the paper,
handmade paper,
is quite visible. You see how the bottom was trimmed, but this portion, the sheet was a little smaller, and they didn't want to trim. What they did trim, they resold to paper makers.
Right.
And they turned that back into paper. Yeah. So this was a very expensive material.
Yeah.
80% of the cost of the book was the cost of the paper.
Wow. Yeah.
So when a person thought of printing a book, if they already owned the type, then that was already amortized.
Yeah.
But they had to always go out and buy new paper. And here's another example, very dramatic, where the difference is more than a centimeter here between the edge of the, and here the outer edge is also uncut. So this is a very large copy. Here's original damage where the sheet itself wasn't perfectly made and they still used it.
Yeah.
Often these would have a little repair. If it was occurring within the text, they might take a small piece of paper and affix that to the area prior to printing.
Brilliant.
Conservation of materials. It's one of the things that we booksellers do, is preserve materials.
Yeah.
And we never have our books restored.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that we do. We're perfectly happy to spend more and buy things in original condition and not alter them. I don't believe we really understand. The science of conservation is very dynamic. It's not fixed. We haven't discovered all there is to know, and any change we may think is neutral, but may well destroy evidence that within 2 weeks someone discovers something very critical, and now that evidence is forever lost, regardless of the good intention of the person who did the restoration. I was 3 years ago on a panel with professional conservators at a very high level, and I spoke against
all
any
conservation,
restoration. Spend your money, buy the best object you can afford, and don't touch it because you are not smart enough to know. And the conservators, of course, are a very self-confident group.
They are.
And they talk to themselves. So in confirming their own prejudices, they do damage to history. And we can't get back what has been taken from us. So once the book is altered, what was lost, we cannot see. And we will not know. And that might be very critical evidence in someone else's historical investigation. So it's extremely arrogant for us to restore books that are valuable or have unique potential, unique evidence in them.
Right.
And it's something that we, as in the book trade, I hope, demonstrate respect to the original materials. That's our job, is to elevate them and preserve them through putting them at a price where people say, I paid a lot of money, I'm not going to mess with this book. I'm not going to alter it. I respect its integrity. And one of
Which is nice for a book like this, because it is in its original. It has its original integrity intact, and it hasn't been messed with, really, has it? I mean, I can't see any evidence of any repair on this.
This was painted. The spine was painted. Probably, you see, it's gray here. That was a shelf mark.
Oh,
this
right.
was theology, and gray in this monastic library was probably the color that was assigned to theology.
Right.
And at some point in the last 25 years, somebody took the gray off, again exposing the pigskin. But you can see how there's paint left here, there's paint left on the, and here's probably a 17th century manuscript title.
Yeah.
The book would not have, at the time of production, been this way on the shelf.
Really
it would be extremely likely that the book was
on its
either this way or this way.
And sometimes they were chained, weren't they?
And you see here, the book just below us is a book of the 1560s, but the title is on the front cover. It wasn't intended to be spine out, it was intended to be used this way.
Yeah.
And these are two books printed about 30 years apart, and the binding is from a medieval liturgical book.
Isn't that pretty?
And this was waste.
Yeah.
After the Council of Trent, individual uses, local uses for specific churches were abandoned, and a single use was imposed on all Catholic churches. So these individual uses were abandoned, but being printed on vellum, it was a valuable material, and you see again printed in red and black.
Yeah.
So these were sold to bookbinders, these vellum sheets, and then they bound them, they used them as bookbindings. So they just cut the sheet.
And we're still doing that. I'm making old books from old debentures.
Yeah.
That we
so
buy,
this conservation of material is a critical part.
And it's a very hard-wearing thing to do,
goodness,
isn't it? Because that little book was bound by a bookbinder using, recycled manuscripts, and it's lasted all these years. It's been around for hundreds of years, this book. Let's have a look and see what this... How old is this little book? 1500 to 1569. It's lovely.
This is another style. This was a book that a duke translated the Psalms, did a paraphrase of the Psalms, and he had the copies bound up. These are his coat of arms, and then he would give them away.
I've never seen that. It's cut out.
It's called a pierced binding.
Right.
They were made all, essentially, when you see this kind of binding, which is vellum, with, instead here of the wooden board being covered on the exterior with pigskin and then decorated, this is paperboard. It's a little bit flexible. You can see the book moves a little bit, and this book does not
solid
move.
Because it's wooden. That one. So that one's wooden, and this one's flexible.
This is paste paper. These are sheets of paper pasted together and then pressed and dried.
To make the board,
So it's covered with red velvet, and then the design is cut out of the vellum. The vellum is wrapped around it, and you see the color.
Pretty, isn't it?
Through it. It's a relatively transient. Obviously, if you put that in the sun, the velvet, the textile from 1596 would be washed out. It would be blank. It wouldn't have color left.
Oh, look at those gophered edges. They're lovely, aren't they? Gilded.
He essentially, almost all copies of this book it's his translation. He had them bound up, and he gave them out as a book gift, or in this case, to people in his immediate, he founded a university, and these are professors and intellectuals in his immediate circle. So these signatures are a critical part of our understanding of this book. Here's 1595, and that's the date of the book.
Oh, it was printed then, was it?
So these intellectuals and professors are exchanging this copy among themselves. They're passing in about 5 years between these several people.
Yeah.
And here's his coat of arms. Unfortunately, we had a rough handler who broke the cords while we owned it.
Oh, right. Oh, no. Oh, God.
Yes, unfortunately.
I'm sorry about that.
Well, that's why we hope for the best. So in bookbinding decoration, this book was instead of individual tools, or for instance, two different materials using contrasts to make the design. This book, or here, a single material with the author or an owner painting, essentially, in this case with ink, but painting the exterior. This is a single, these are individual stamps. This is one stamp, and it's, at the time, this was called scroll work. It was very chic. Bookbindings participate in the decorative arts. That's a kid skin. That's a very specialized and unusual skin that first began to be used for bookbindings in Rome in the 1540s. This is printed in Geneva, and we identified again where this was bound. And this is, if you can see, a little bit gold is still left here. And a bookbind, you see the dolphin with the foliage coming out of its mouth. And the two different sides are completely different. This is quite architectural. It's what's called unfigured ornament. It's pure ornament. And this is figured ornament, but with a kind of oriental, these are called arabesques, this kind of oriental center work. So a lozenge, inside the lozenge is a circle with strap work. These little lines that bend around are called strap work. This is very chic. This is this is the height of fashion. So this is a mix of silver and gold. It's called Swiss gold or Rauschel. And this bookbinding historian, who's a Brit, A.R.A. Hobson, proposed that, in fact, it was never to be gold, that the bookbinder oxidized the design at the time of creation, seeking to make a white and black contrast. So here, the design is white on white. Here, the design is ink on white. Here is white on red, and here is scrap, red and black on white.
What a nice mixture.
So the variety of early materials is often unique to the copy. And that's part of the history. So if we say,
as well, isn't it?
If this was damaged and I had the spine repaired, well, I'm heading backwards. I'm covering over what could be crucial evidence to somebody. For instance, Nicholas Pickwoad, a very well-known Englishman. Well, we call him Nicholas Nickwoad. We're quite friendly with Nicholas. But Nicholas is a bindings structure person, and what we've been talking about is essentially decoration. So these are quite different. Nicholas was essentially a pioneer of binding structure, the history of binding structure. He has a website. It's called Ligatus, Ligatus, and it's a marvelous resource. And you can then look up the names for we call this brass furniture. So you can look up the names for these individual components. If you have a book, you can learn about your book.
Or make facsimiles.
There are, of course, printed books on this subject. But as everybody likes the web, and the web is in your pocket,
it's good to have
it involves no discrimination or judgment. But Nicholas's website, this Ligatus, is an excellent resource at the very highest levels of scholarship, and it's going to change the dialogue and discussion and vocabulary of these original materials. He is extremely respectful and aware of all the different components of these things. He is really great.
He is. I've met him a few times, He knows his stuff.
This is a dynamic field, not only in decoration and in structure and conservation, but in our historical understanding of the uses and creation. And this often tells us who was a reader. We saw here the inscriptions that are contemporary, where the people who owned the book are related to the man who wrote and published the book, and who are the recipients with his coat of arms. How here, this book is written by a woman, one of the most famous 16th century scholars, women scholars, and this comes out.
What's her name?
And Fulvia Olimpa Murata, M-O-R-A-T-A. She was a humanist,
Okay.
She wrote humanist dialogues and orations. She wrote Greek and Latin poetry.
Right.
She, in one of her dialogues, she is speaking in the first person. That's quite unusual.
Right.
She died. She was Italian, Morata, ending in a vowel. She was Italian. She was at the court of Ferrara. She was brought up with the Duchess of Ferrara's daughter. She was educated at the court. The Duchess of Ferrara, though Italian, was from the north and was a Protestant. And she, Olympia, became a Protestant, fell in love with a Protestant, and had to flee Italy, which was Catholic, and moved to Germany. Her papers were burned in the siege of Schweinfurt.
Really? Wow.
And she died.
Nice story.
Oh, they're all good. And they're true, and those are the best stories.
For
So
sure.
what you see on TV that's made up, the fantasies and the CGI, if you just look in old books, there are many more marvelous and more intellectually challenging and imagination rewarding stories that of things you can't imagine. 12-year-old girls married at sword point because they are the unwed duchess of a valuable territory and they are invaded and forced to marry. There are stories of every stripe.
Yeah.
Of unimaginable.
Yeah. If you can understand the language that they're writing in.
Oh.
Because some of these are ancient Greek or ancient Italian and they might be quite tricky to understand. He knows his stuff, this guy, Bruce McKittrick. I think that was an invitation to come to the next fair, guys. He's just pulling out another book now.
Well, again, because people are interested, as about 57% of the population is women.
Yeah.
We have long specialized in material that relates to the lives of women.
Oh, great.
This is,
I like that, being a woman myself.
My last one was bound in contemporary green vellum.
Wow.
So we're always looking for things that are interesting.
Yeah.
This is a book on gynecology and obstetrics that was written for and dedicated to Lucretia Borgia. The outside is about 1720. Yeah. It's French. We haven't identified this tool. It's quite high style. You see how there's no label, how the tooling is directly on the spine. That began, and we know from that the book was to be shelved this way.
Yeah.
The labeling and tooling on the spine began in the late 16th century with this fellow, who was a very famous historian. This is one of the early witnesses to a book we know was shelved spine out.
Yeah.
And the book is 1578 or 82 or so. But we know this is when he was unmarried. That's his coat of arms. And after he was married, he added his wife's arms to his library. He had a large library. Yeah. But we know that this is contemporary with that.
Wow.
So we know that this is a book intended to be spine out, while we're almost certain this was a book to be laid flat.
Yes.
And here, by the mid 1720s,
so that's 1720.
we know that this was to be spine out.
Yeah, and that's when there were lots more books around. So
oh
they
my
probably
goodness,
had to
there were millions.
Put them on shelves, whereas before this was one precious object, and they might have had one, mightn't they? Presumably?
Or well, in this case, they probably had maybe a couple of dozen.
Okay.
So, but this would have been mixed also with manuscripts.
Right, of course.
So printed books and manuscripts were not divided so clearly.
Yeah.
So this book has a little bit of history. It would belong to this person and this person. So this was a 1720s owner. This is an 1830s English owner. This was a Frenchman. Here we have inscriptions. We know it was in an English sale of the 1830s. We also know this is a bibliography of science and medicine. We also know it belonged to this bookseller who signed his initials and put his date of ownership. And I recognize this handwriting and this handwriting, another bookseller, very prominent, who put his initials in.
Right.
So trade provenance is also important.
Yes.
This was written for her just after she was married by her gynecologist and private physician. It's a book on giving birth and having sex. And with this man, she had 14 pregnancies and died at 39 after the birth of her last child, who also followed her in death in 2 weeks.
Oh dear.
So probably the most dangerous thing a woman could do was get pregnant.
Yeah.
It was fraught with danger at every turn. So he wrote this book in Latin for Lucretia Borgia. So we know Lucrezia Borgia for a variety of reasons, but this is dedicated to Lucrezia Borgia. It's essentially a privately printed book done in 1502 and presented to her. And she was the Borgia family was Spanish. She lived in Italy. She was fluent both in writing and speaking in French and Italian, but she was taught Greek and Latin by one of the great humanists,
right,
Pomponio Leto,
who
had his own academy.
Right.
And so this was a book that, though written in Latin, would have been a book she could have read. So it's not a book written above her head. And the preface, as it has to do with, the book has to do with sex, is extremely frank.
Okay, what does it say? What does it say?
That's my
What's
Latin
the frank
is.
status of that front page?
Well, this is typically you begin. This is from Ludovico Bonaccioli of Ferrara on women, 9 books. Aeneid is 9 books. To Lucrezia Este, she just married into the Alfonso d'Este, and her family name is Borgia, now of Ferrara. She's just moved to Ferrara, and her father is Pope. Her brother Cesare had killed her second husband, had attempted to have him murdered.
Wow.
When that failed and she was caring for him, they arrived and her brother strangled her husband, her second husband.
Why?
She was, well, the next marriage was much more advantageous territorially.
So God, what a horrible
Well, we
thing
don't
to do.
live, it's not, life isn't a petting zoo.
Yeah.
So when I say there are fantastic stories in history, she is thought to be a poisoner. It's almost certainly not the case.
Right.
But she was pregnant 18 times in her life.
My goodness.
She had some illegitimate children. She had lovers, but she also was very faithful to Alfonso d'Este. This was her, she died his wife at 39. And so this idea of presenting the book, this is called text type, and these are, the chapters are introduced, and they use this majuscule letter, and then they refer as a humanist book by making what looks to be a Roman inscription out of the title of the chapter.
Lovely.
So she's brought up with a humanist education. She reads and speaks. She reads 4 languages.
Yeah.
She speaks and reads 2 languages.
Yeah.
She
We're just talking about this
is
book written by
receiving
Lucrezia Borgia.
this book,
For her.
which is made to refer to classical antiquity, to elevate the subject to be a very high subject, when it's in fact about as intimate a subject as you can get.
Yeah.
The only other thing you put in your body is food.
Okay, so it's a book about sex and childbirth. Just
But
for
from
anybody
her
who's
personal
just heard it.
physician who was with her at her death.
From her personal physician, and it was written for Lucrezia Borgia. That's very interesting. Thank you so much for sharing all that. And it's really lovely to meet you. I'll
Thanks.
be back.
It's fun.
Yeah.
As you can see, we have a good time.
Yeah, see you guys.